a magia do futebol. Somos diferentes, mas torcer nos faz parecidos. Não importa se você assiste com a camisa da sorte, no bar com amigos ou em casa na poltrona.
Preparou, vai bater, pegou!
Se você é o que grita mais alto, o que só comemora depois do replay, cada um torce do seu jeito. Coca-Cola, torcer é pra todos.
Meu nome é Cairo Santos e eu sou kicker e único brasileiro jogando na NFL. Cada chute, cada jarda conquistada, cada passo me levou para mais perto dos meus sonhos. Agora, a cada R$200 em compras com seu Visa cadastrado, você tem a chance de ficar mais perto do sonho de assistir ao Super Bowl 59. E usando o seu cartão de débito, você ainda concorre a prêmios diários de até R$1.000. Não importa o tamanho do seu sonho, dê o primeiro passo. Visa, apoiando seus passos aonde você quiser chegar.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. I know. I said no more Monday episodes. But we got to have an episode after what just happened this past weekend. We got to. Because if no other reason, then I got to talk about it. And I'm sorry if you listen to this and you're like, this was a bunch of gibberish, but I don't care because this weekend was awesome. It was so much better than it had any business being. If you like the podcast, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you like, comment, share, get that algorithm going, guys. We love it. And of course, follow me not just on X and Instagram and on the Big Ten Football Talk podcast, but also on the Big Ten Huddle and soon the Voice of College Football. Make sure you do that. Like, follow, subscribe, do it. I'm just gonna go right into it. The SEC sucks. They suck, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And you know what's amazing is seeing the media, the national media, try to cope with it. So I want to read a tweet by Aaron Torres, who I think it generally is a reasonable guy. So I'm not trying to call him out. I'm more just calling out just awful bias in college football. So here's what it is. Here's what Aaron Torres says. One thing that I think is abundantly clear after today, the portal and NIL has basically made the SEC a league that on any day, anyone can beat anyone else. Basically no gimmies in this league, and frankly, no significant gap between team like 2 and 13/14. In other words, it just means more, right? In the SEC, like they're just all better. You know who you should put in the SEC then? Georgia State, who beat Vanderbilt. Like, this is absurd. And I knew it was going to happen, that as soon as teams go down, we're going to justify it by saying, well, the SEC is actually pretty good top to bottom. They stink. They're mid. I don't want to hear it. You know, if this were Ohio State or Oregon, or if this were Ohio State losing to Iowa, Oregon losing to Michigan State, or Penn State losing to UCLA, we would never hear the end of it about how bad the Big Ten is. You want to know why? Because that's been the reality for the past 20 years. The top of the conference and the Big Ten struggles, well, then the Big Ten stinks. If the top of the SEC struggles, well, you know, they're all just really good. No, they stink. Alabama got beat 40-35 against Vandy. It's the second week in a row where they've allowed 30 plus points. Maybe, here's the thing, maybe Kalen DeBoer doesn't know how to coach defense. Like maybe, just maybe, that's a struggle. Like maybe Georgia, I know they didn't lose, but they struggled against Auburn. Maybe they're not as good. maybe they really miss Brock Bowers. What a thought, right? Maybe they miss all their defensive draft picks over the past several years. Maybe, just maybe. Maybe Tennessee just stinks, right? After a loss to Arkansas, right? Arkansas. Goodness, the team that lost to Oklahoma State and had trouble with you freaking AB? What are we doing? Oh, and then Missouri, they were supposed to be really good until they got clobbered by A&M. I don't want to hear about the bad calls because the reality is the bad calls weren't going to, good calls weren't going to save you from that shellacking. And by the way, who'd they get beat by? Oh, let's see. The team that lost to Notre Dame, who lost to a freaking MAC team, right? LSU, who's maybe pretty good, right? Well, they lost to what we're finding out is kind of a mid Big Ten team. Can we stop the craziness? The SEC is mid. They are mid. Now, before people get in the comments and be like, well, but what do you think could happen by the end of the year? I think, Alabama does have a lot of talent. Georgia has a lot of talent. Tennessee has a lot of talent. Right? I think A&M could make a run here. I think LSU could make a run. And would it surprise me if any of those teams went far in the playoffs? No, because talent does matter. It does. But can we stop with this narrative that the SEC is just so deep and it's just so hard to overcome? Vanderbilt had not beaten Alabama in 40 years. Do you know how many times they've beaten a top 5 team in their history? 0. Well, now it's 1. They didn't just beat a top 5 team. They beat the number 1 team in the country. The number 1 team. It's the first time in their 120-year history of playing football that they have beaten a top 5 team and they beat the number 1 team in the country. And we're sitting here saying, oh man, Vandy is so good. They're so competitive now. No! This is a team that almost blew a lead to Virginia Tech. This is a team that lost to Georgia State. What are we doing? This is the right narrative. If you want the right narrative, here it is. Are Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee, are they done? Are they washed? No. And they wouldn't even be washed in the 14 playoff era. Here's why. Because the media bias, right? Bama has had bad losses. This might be the worst loss, at least since before Nick Saban. But they've had bad losses before and still made the playoff. So I don't think that's it. But here's the narrative. The SEC is not invincible. And the SEC is not they're not filled with as many powerhouses as you thought. Remember in the beginning of the season, 6 out of the top 7 teams in the SEC, or 6 of the top 7 AP poll, top 7 teams are SEC teams. They're great. They're fantastic. No. They're good, right? I know I said the SEC sucks. They don't actually suck. I'm just tired of the narrative. Well, the SEC is this undaunted rival. No. What is borne out is that they're a good league with a lot of talent that's very beatable. It's very beatable. Right? What's the best out of conference win for the SEC right now? Is it I have to say Clemson by Georgia, and Georgia, that score is really inflated, right? 34-6, but it was 6-3, I think, at half. And it was more bad Clemson than it was good Georgia. That's not to say that Georgia's not going to be a good team and not going to make the playoff. But to sit here and say, well, but this league is just it's just so daunting to face week in and week out. And there's just so many powerhouses. Maybe this is called parity. But I would just argue they're not as good as you think. Like, I think Texas is the only elite team in the SEC right now. And even that, what data point do we have there? We have Michigan. Well, Michigan's one-dimensional, and they're on their third quarterback. So maybe they're good. Like, I think they are elite, just looking at their personnel. Do I think Alabama's good? Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think Alabama's going to be fine. You know what, though? They're not Nick Saban, Alabama. Doug Maurice has made this point over and over again at Kings of the North. Like, you can't replace a generational coach. I was not on that train. Like, I really thought that I thought Alabama would keep rolling, especially with the roster that they had. But this is alarming if you're Alabama, because it makes you mortal to lose a game like this, because Vanderbilt's not that good. Vanderbilt's maybe a 6-6 team, 7-5. Like, it's similar. No offense to Minnesota. It's similar to Minnesota beating USC, right? And I thought Minnesota could beat USC. But why did I think they could beat USC? Because USC is not a top 25 team. At least not right now, they're not. That's why. USC has, they outcoached Brian Kelly and LSU. And they have shown that they're okay. They're good. They'll probably have 7 to 9 wins this season. Maybe they're a borderline top 25 team. Maybe, but they're not great. They're not great. And so, but notice that's not the narrative with Alabama. Alabama, it's, well, anybody in the SEC can get anybody any given Saturday. Oh, they're so great. 2 through 14. They're so good. No, it's so stupid. And I am glad, at least to some degree, the AP poll was not fooled. Here's the AP poll top 5. Texas at number 1. I have no problem with that. No problem with that whatsoever. Ohio State 2, Oregon 3, Penn State 4. That's your top 4. And I think that matters, because I think the AP voters got it right. They got it right. There is no reason why Georgia, Alabama, or Tennessee should be anywhere close to the top 4 right now. They need to, you need to punish them for that. And what drives me nuts is that the team that is 5th is Georgia, and what they are separated by 6 votes from Penn State. And I just want to sit there and be like, so are we going to just ignore that Georgia was getting shellacked in the first half against Alabama, who just lost to freaking Vanderbilt? And also, did we really just leapfrog Georgia over Alabama? After Alabama pretty much had them, they crushed them for the first 3 quarters of that game. What are we doing? Now, I can understand why you have Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. They're all anywhere from 5 through 8. But it's still log jammed up there, and you're like, what are we doing? Like, there's other undefeated teams. Not that I think, I think you can make a good argument why Indiana, for instance, is 18th, and why Iowa State is tied for 11th. And I can understand that, but still, these teams did not. It's not like Alabama lost to Tennessee, or Tennessee lost to Georgia, or Ole Miss, for that matter, who's 9th, lost to Texas. They all lost to mediocre SEC teams. What's even more maddening, if you go to ESPN, they talk about, they do game recaps and whatnot. Here's what drives me nuts about their power rankings and whatnot. On one hand, they'll talk about Alabama and how they can get back rolling. But then on the flip side, they will knock Ohio State for a 4-touchdown win over Iowa that honestly wasn't even that close. I mean, listen to this. This is literally from ESPN. Number 3, Ohio State had little trouble swatting away Iowa 35-7. Still, it had to feel like a loss for the Buckeyes, who are the first-ranked team to allow points to Iowa's offense since Michigan surrendered 2 touchdowns in a win over the Hawkeyes in Week 5 of 2022. Are we serious there? Did you guys not watch the game and how Caleb Johnson scored on the second string defense when it was 35-0? Do you even watch the game? Then number 5, Georgia responded to last week's loss to Alabama with an entirely reasonable 31-13 win over Auburn, who stinks, by the way. Carson Beck was 23 of 28 passing, and Trevor Etienne scored twice, and yet it was hardly the offensive performance that offered significant reassurance. This uneven start to the season is insignificant. More than anything, Georgia wore down Auburn rather than delivering any sort of statement. I'll say this. At least they're a little honest about Georgia struggling. But, I mean, to say that Ohio State was sluggish, did you... What context, what world are you living in? Oh my gosh. Just sports media is stupid, man. And at this point, if I hear Desmond Howard just pop off about $20 million for Ohio State, like I don't understand why he's employed. And I don't understand how he has such a platform. I shouldn't say how he's employed, how he has a platform like this, because all he does is spout stupid stuff all the time. It's on brand, I guess, for ESPN. Here, what's the point? The point that and narrative that I come to is the SEC is not unbeatable, and that I think the North, I think the Big Ten is going to have a huge say in the playoff. Right now, I have 4 teams making it in. I don't know how, from a playoff committee standpoint, I'm not sure how this is going to shake out for the SEC, because you got to imagine that more losses are coming. You just got to look, all the playoff contenders outside of Texas, like all of them, like really struggled. All of them have a loss. And so how, like, I just don't know what's going to happen. Now, it's not going to be all about wins and losses. I know that, but I mean, just to give you an example, I'm scrolling up the schedules for the year. So Georgia, we've talked about Georgia's schedule. Mississippi State, but then at Texas, bye week, Florida, at Ole Miss, Tennessee, UMass, Georgia Tech. I see a potential for 2 more losses there. At Texas is probably 1. Ole Miss, are they? Is it possible they go 8-4? They're not making the playoff at 8-4. All right, let's look at Alabama. South Carolina, that's not a gimme. At Tennessee, that's not a gimme. Missouri, might be a gimme now. But at LSU, at Oklahoma, like, I know there's issues with both those teams, but did they go 9-3? I think it's possible. Ole Miss, they crushed South Carolina this week, but they go to LSU. LSU's off a bye. They go to Arkansas. They play Georgia. Like, are they getting in at 9-3 or 10-2? LSU, I don't trust LSU as much as I can throw them, but they've got Ole Miss, they've got Arkansas, they've got Texas A&M, they have Alabama, they have Vandy, they have Oklahoma, Mizzou. I mean, forget Mizzou. They're not a serious threat to the playoff. They can't be. And their schedule is awful. but they're going to lose to Bama most likely, and maybe one other team, and they're not going to get in. Oklahoma, no. Tennessee, they've got Florida, Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi State, at Georgia. Like, I think we're looking at a world where you have a lot of teams in the SEC that are sitting on the outside at 9-3, and when people are like, well, we could put them in, but are we really going to put in a 9-3 Missouri squad over a 10-2 Indiana? When quite honestly, Missouri doesn't have any good wins. Like, what's their best win? Boston College? Is it Vanderbilt? Would it be Vanderbilt? Would it be Auburn if they're 9-3? Or what about say it is between Indiana and Alabama. I might guess that they'd put Alabama in, but why? Well, they beat Georgia. Okay, but you lost to Vandy. Say they lose to Tennessee and to LSU. Well, then who's their best win outside of Georgia? And they lost to Vanderbilt. So I just think it makes this really interesting because we know that some SEC teams that probably don't deserve it are going to get in the playoff. And they'll probably do well in the playoff. That's fine. But I think we have to realize that I think the assumption that 4, 5, maybe even 6 SEC teams, they're not it's not going to be 6. It's certainly not going to be 5. It might be 4. It might even be less than that. Which I think bodes well for the rest of college football. Because I think it means that the Big Ten is going to get at least 3 in. I think it means that there might be room for multiple Big 12 and ACC teams. And that makes it more compelling in my mind when you have more and more teams that are getting in. So I think it's great for college football. I think the narrative should be that the SEC is not dominant. If that is your assertion, you are wrong. It's just wrong. The SEC is not the dominant premier conference. They might be number 1 by a hair, and even then I would push back. But right now, after what I've seen, I would take Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon over Texas, Georgia, and Alabama. I just don't see. I don't see how you can pick them. And that's not to say that that's going to stay the same, right? Teams change, teams evolve. I have concerns about Penn State after this past week. I do have concerns about Oregon. I thought Ohio State looked really, really good this week. And I think, quite honestly, Ohio State I thought they shot themselves in the foot, but other than that, I thought they looked about as good as I've seen them in 5 years. And that doesn't mean they're going to win on Saturday, but it does mean that I think they are. I think if people think that they are, they haven't played anybody, just watch out. Watch out. I'll share a couple thoughts about the Big Ten since this is the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. I might as well, right? Oh gosh, where do I want to start? Well, I'll start with Ohio State, Iowa. Ohio State is, I think it's easy to look at the first half and think they were only up 7-0 on Iowa. They must be terrible. Jeremiah Smith had an uncharacteristic fumble. It was a great play by Iowa. Great play. I think it was Sebastian Castro who made that play. It was either him or Jay Higgins, who are very good players. They had a stop on 4th down on, I think, probably the worst offensive line plays in the game. And then Will Howard threw a bad interception. And I know you might hear that and think, oh, so it sounds like Ohio State struggled. Here's the thing. In years past, I have felt very, very nervous about Iowa when they've done things like that, it never felt in doubt. And the reason why is because when Ohio State wanted to, they could line up and run the ball. And they stopped the run. And I haven't seen an Ohio State team do that against a team with a pulse in a long time. Probably not since 2019. And listen, Iowa is good at stopping the run, and they are good at running the ball. And Ohio State did both. They ran the ball well, they stopped the run. And if they wanted to, I think they could have run up and down the field all game, but instead they chose to work on things, work on different parts of their game. Which, why wouldn't you when you have Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith as your wide receivers? So I thought this was about as good of a win for Ohio State as you could have hoped for, right? They got their backups in again in the fourth quarter. I thought in the third quarter, they played really good complementary football. They forced turnovers. They really restricted Iowa. I think until the fourth quarter, when they started putting backups in, they'd only held Iowa to 130, 140 yards. And listen, I know Iowa's offense is not good. It's not two-dimensional. It's one-dimensional. But that one dimension has been wrecking everybody when everybody knows they can't throw. And Ohio State did what they needed to do in a key position where a lot of people had questions. So I think Ohio State's really, really good. I think you need to change quarterbacks. I think Brendan Sullivan needs to be your guy moving forward. Cade McNamara is not good. And I think Kirk Ferentz needs to give more control to Tim Lester, because I think he's holding this team back. I think Iowa, from a talent perspective, could finish undefeated with their schedule. I think their defense is good enough. I think their offensive line is good enough. I think Caleb Johnson is a workhorse, and I think they have talent on the outside that is at least serviceable. I think Luke Lachey is a really good tight end, but they need to change quarterbacks, and they need to let Tim Lester operate, because other than that, this team is going to be your typical 8-4, 9-3 team under Kirk Ferentz, where their defense is great, but their offense just doesn't do anything. So it's time. They got to move on from Cade. He's just not good enough. That Oregon, Michigan State, I thought Michigan State would put up more of a fight. Oregon, I thought from a running game perspective, was excellent. I thought that defense was phenomenal. That's going to be a fun matchup on Saturday. That D-line against Ohio State's improved offensive line, Jordan Birch, man. And, linebacker Mateo Uiagalelei. Oh, my gosh. They're so good. And, that back seven led by Jabbar Muhammad. I mean, that's going to be a fun matchup, that defense versus Ohio State's offense. I thought the quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, didn't have a great game. And it wasn't just the picks. Like, I just thought he was a little out of rhythm and out of sorts throughout the game. The offensive line is really solidified. That's been my biggest concern with the Ducks. Jordan James, that guy's a stud. He had a breakout game against the Spartans. And I think a key to this game is which team actually runs the ball more effectively. If Oregon can run on this Ohio State defense, then I think Oregon has a great shot to win at home. If Ohio State can shut down the run, I think that becomes really problematic. So I thought the Ducks were really impressive against a Michigan State team who, showed some things against Ohio State the week before. I do think Michigan State was probably a little worn down. They played Ohio State on Saturday. They had a short week, had to go to Autzen. And I just think the reality of where Michigan State is right now is they're still making a lot of mistakes, and to try to have to stack Ohio State and then Oregon back to back was just going to be really, really tough. So I thought Aiden Childs had moments. I thought he had fewer moments than he did against Ohio State, but ultimately I thought I thought they really struggled, and I was disappointed by their performance. Indiana, Northwestern. Northwestern hung in there, but Jack Lausch still. I know his stat line looked good, but it was kind of meh. But they did push Indiana, which I thought they would, and I think Indiana continues to be poised, and I think right now, if I had to pick 12 teams in the playoff, Indiana's one of them, and it's part of its schedule. I think they have a legitimate shot to go 11-1 with their schedule. Now it'll be tough. It'll be really tough. They've got Michigan, they've got Ohio State, they got to play Michigan State, they got to play Washington, they got to play Nebraska. So I mean, that's no joke, right? As they come off the bye week. But I do think like Indiana has an outside shot here. And Curtis Rower continues to be, I mean, he's so good. Elijah Surratt is awesome, by the way. They have a lot of playmakers on that offense. Elijah Surratt's awesome. Love that dude. Michigan, Washington. I'll just say this, and I know people will disagree with me. I think Michigan, if you think Jack Tuttle is going to save the program, or if you think that he's a better option than Alex Orji based on 20 minutes, I am not sold. And I get it. They had, it took Washington a while to adjust, and they got 17 points, and Tuttle looked really good. I watched Tuttle for 7 years as he's kind of bounced around. I've never been impressed by him. And I'm not sure that he is going to end up being any better for them than Alex Orji is. That may be a bad take, but I just don't think that Tuttle is the answer. And I would actually work more on helping Orji develop in the passing game. I think that times with Orji, they've actually looked more competent. I get it that they looked good for 20 minutes against Washington, but I think Jack Tuttle is a non-starter. Like, he is a career backup. I don't think that's going to work out for you. I think with Orji, at least you have that element of the run with his power. Washington with a bounce back win, thought it was a big win for them and really good for them. And I think the thing that we're seeing out of Washington is if not for being undisciplined and bad play calling, like, this is potentially a 6-0 team. Washington's got some juice, man. And like, I could see them, like, you look at their schedule, they have at Iowa next week. That'll be a tough one, but Indiana, USC, Penn State, UCLA, and Oregon. It's a tough road. But if they get things worked out, I think there is a serious potential for a playoff push for the Huskies. I'm not calling it, but they have the running back, they have the running game, they have the receiving core, they have the quarterback. And while I think the run defense is certainly a little suspect, they have been better defensively than I expected. So look out for that. Washington had a great game. I was so happy for their kicker Gross, who was struggling. Had a couple of big field goals in that game. Nebraska, Rutgers. Nebraska won 14-7 in what seemed like there was a tornado happening in Lincoln. Gusts of wind. Good buddy Sean asked about a touchdown that didn't count for Rutgers, and I don't know what happened there. I need to go back and watch it, but I'm wondering if on the first and goal in the middle of the third quarter, when Kyle Monangai plunged in the end zone, I wonder if they called him, if they blew a whistle before he crossed the line to gain. Either way, it's inexcusable. Like, it's inexcusable that the Big Ten missed that. And I just I don't know what to think about that. But I'll say this, Nebraska, they get a 1-score win. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And this is a good Rutgers team. So I think Nebraska fans, you should be excited. 5-1, you're 1 win away from bowl eligibility. I know you guys have loftier goals than that, but get to 6 wins first, right? Big game against Indiana in a couple weeks. Big game against Indiana. Indiana and Nebraska both have a bye week. That's going to be a banger. I'm so excited for that game. That's going to be great. USC, Minnesota. Been saying it. I said at the beginning of the season, I thought Minnesota was better than people thought. I think we finally saw the Minnesota team that we expected. Justin Wally, man, came in clutch, especially on that last drive. USC, Miller Moss, we're seeing his deficiencies. Struggles with different, making sure with checks at the line. JR at the Big Ten Huddle really pointed that out, and I thought it was a good thought. The offensive line has struggled, and the defense is ho-hum. It's good. It's better coached, but it's not there yet. They need more talent. And so I thought on the road against Minnesota, I thought Minnesota was able to run the ball a bit. I thought Brosmer, he's really started to settle in. That was a much needed win for Minnesota, especially if they want to make a bowl game. Again, schedule-wise, I think, now they go to UCLA, and then they get Maryland, Illinois, Rutgers, Penn State, and Wisconsin. That's hard, but that's not undoable to get to a bowl game. They need 3 wins. And I think the fact that they go to UCLA, that's a must win. I think Maryland is a must win. And then you're saying, okay, we got to win one of Illinois, Rutgers, Penn State, and Wisconsin. I think you can get Wisconsin. I think you can get all those teams, maybe with the exception of Penn State. So, but big win. And then I'll talk about Wisconsin and Purdue last. Purdue stinks, right? Like Vanderbilt might be better than Purdue. No, I'm kidding. Maybe Alabama might be better than Purdue. Oh, Purdue stinks. Oh my gosh. Honestly, everybody should be fired. And I know what someone made the point that you got to give people 3 years because it's Purdue. Not when it's this dysfunctional. Not when it's this dysfunctional. If you're losing by a couple scores to everybody, sure. This was 52-6 against Braden Locke. Like Wisconsin, I don't know if Wisconsin scored this many points in all their games prior to this. They did. They did. But I mean, 52 points. 52. They hadn't scored more than 24. And this is a defensive-minded coach. You can't.
Essa música numa aventura off-road, hein? Já imaginou? Então aproveita para se imaginar a bordo do novo Jeep Renegade 2025. Agora com as novas versões Altitude, Willys, Sahara e Night Eagle. Todas com motor turbo de 185 cavalos, o mais potente da categoria, capacidade off-road e 5 anos de garantia. Com certeza um deles é a sua cara. Ou melhor, o seu espírito aventureiro. Aproveite. Faça um test drive no novo Jeep Renegade. Paz no Trânsito começa por você.
Olha o contra-ataque aí. Vem que vem o time avançando rápido pela linha de campo. Bola dominada no pé do camisa 10. Ele vai pra cima, passou pelo primeiro, passou pelo segundo. E bateu a grande área, vai chutar. Bateu, é gol! Que golaço, minha gente!
A experiência de futebol mais autêntica já criada pros games. Junte-se no 5x5 Rush, a nova maneira de jogar com os amigos e leve seu clube pra vitória. EA Sports FC 25. Dê tudo pelo clube. Já disponível.
You can't do this. Sorry, 52, not 54. Or no, I was right. Yeah, 52. Most saved to score is 24. You can't. You got to get rid of Purdue. I thought Wisconsin, it's a bounce back game, but I still have a lot of questions. They go to Rutgers next. I think Rutgers is going to be hoping to prove that they are who we think they are. So, if you go to the Big Ten Huddle, you'll see my power rankings there. Make sure to check it out. I'll give you my playoff bracket real quick, and then we'll head out. But I got Texas 1, Ohio State 2. I'm putting Clemson 3 because Miami's going to lose the way they should have lost the past 2 weeks. And there's no way in my mind that they're going to win the ACC if they keep playing like this. So I've got them out of my playoff in general right now. 4, I have BYU. Let's see. I'm updating it as I go because I'm realizing I don't agree with myself on certain things. So Texas, Ohio State, Clemson, BYU. 5, Oregon. I think Oregon's really good. I think if they lose 1, it's Ohio State, and that might be it at this point. If Michigan gets things together, then it could be tough, but I think Oregon's legit. I think Penn State, schedule-wise, they're probably going to go 10-2 or 11-1, but I would guess 11-1 as well. Alabama 7, Georgia 8. I do think they're going to bounce back. I do think they're going to be okay. Number 9, I have Iowa State. I think Iowa State is really chugging along. I think they'll get in that large bid. I have Indiana 10, Notre Dame 11, and as always, Boise State 12, who has maybe the best running back in the country in Ashton Jonty. My gosh, is he good. That'll do it for this bonus episode of the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Remember, the SEC is mid. Like, follow, subscribe. Check us out. Big Ten Huddle, Voice of College Football. Love you all. Take care. God bless.